What's going on, everybody? Cleopus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be doing a quick comparison between the Cricket Innovate E5G and the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G 2021. Now, as always, before we go any further, I do want to remind you to hit that subscribe button, and if you want to learn more about either of these phones individually, I will be linking to several other videos about them in the description, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with the Cricket Innovate E5G, we're getting a 6.6-inch LCD display with a resolution of 720p, a PPI of 269, and an aspect ratio of 20:9. With the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G 2021, we're getting a 6.8-inch IPS LCD display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 386, and an aspect ratio of 20:9. So while the Cricket Innovate E5G really isn't bad for what it is, the Moto G Stylus 5G definitely has a much better display. First of all, as you can see here, the Stylus 5G is clearly larger, which tends to be a good thing when you're consuming a lot of content. And in addition to this, with a 1080p resolution, the Moto G Stylus 5G also has a much sharper image. So in general, if you're consuming a lot of content, whether you're watching videos, playing games, or just looking at photos, or even reading where the quality doesn't even matter, overall you are going to get a much better experience with the Moto G Stylus 5G. Now for storage, the Cricket Innovate E5G is getting 64GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, and the Moto G Stylus 5G is getting 128GB with microSD card expansion as well. But keep in mind, the factory unlocked version of this phone does have 256, but the Cricket version, which this one is, does only have 128. But either way, no matter how you look at it, the Moto G Stylus 5G does have quite a bit more storage than the Cricket Innovate E5G, and in this day and age, with stuff like apps, the system, and just files in general getting larger and larger, I feel like this is definitely an important thing to consider. On one hand, with the Cricket Innovate E5G, 64GB, while definitely not being ideal in my opinion, is still at least decently acceptable, especially if you're a really casual user and you're really not doing a whole lot on your phone. In that case, as long as you're mindful of what you're putting on it, you should be perfectly fine. But on the other hand, if you're planning on having a lot of apps and stuff like that, or even just photos and videos, the Moto G Stylus 5G having double the storage of the Cricket Innovate E5G will definitely be a much better choice. And again, remember, both phones do have microSD card expansion, so if you want to use that to offload stuff like photos and videos, for example, you always can. Now for security features, both phones have Face Unlock, and both of them also have fingerprint scanners right here on the back, so definitely a nice classic spot for them. But starting with the Cricket Innovate E5G, let's go ahead and give them a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. And now for the Moto G Stylus 5G. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see there, they both worked real well, no problems at all. And again, remember, both phones also have Face Unlock, so if you want to use that instead, you always can. Now taking a look at the camera setups here, with the Cricket Innovate E5G, we got a water drop notch for the front facing camera. This camera is 5 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a pretty simple dual camera setup with a 13 megapixel main camera and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. With the Moto G Stylus 5G, we got a hole punch design for the front facing camera. This camera is 16 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a quad camera setup with a 48 megapixel main camera, a 5 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 5 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So in general, as far as pretty much everything goes, the Moto G Stylus 5G has a huge advantage here. First of all, it has way more features, including an ultra wide camera and a macro camera, neither of which the Cricket Innovate E5G has. And in addition to this, as far as quality goes, the Moto G Stylus 5G does take significantly better photos. So if you're taking a lot of pictures, maybe to share on social media for example, the Moto G Stylus 5G will have a huge advantage. But on the other hand, if you're a really casual camera user and you're not really doing a whole lot with it, in that case, the Cricket Innovate E5G, while not having near the quality as the Moto G Stylus 5G, will still at least get the job done. Now as far as RAM and processor go, both phones are getting 4GB of RAM, but keep in mind with the Moto G Stylus 5G, the factory unlocked version of this phone you get directly from Motorola does have 6GB of RAM instead, but again, the Cricket version has 4. Now that being said, with the Cricket Innovate E5G, we're getting the MediaTek Dimensity 700 processor, and with the Moto G Stylus 5G, we're getting the Qualcomm Snapdragon 480. So both phones do have pretty good processors and really good performance, and in general, in my experience, you're not really going to see a huge performance difference between the two. Now that being said, I did run Geekbench 5 benchmark tests on them, and here are the scores right here. So again, as you can see from this test, you're really not going to see a huge difference in performance, so I definitely wouldn't use processing power as a real indicator on which phone to buy, because at the end of the day, as far as the capabilities go, they're pretty much going to be the same. But that being said, for what they are, both phones are decently fast. Sure, they're not going to be nearly as fast as a higher end device, and if you're doing really high performance activities like more intense mobile mobile gaming, for example, I don't think either of these phones is really the best choice for that. But if you're doing more basic activities like browsing the web, using social media, streaming content like videos and music and stuff like that, either phone will get the job done perfectly fine, and I do think no matter which one you go with, you will have a good experience either way. Now when it comes to the battery, with the Cricket Innovate E5G, we're getting a 4000 mAh battery that supports 10 watt fast charging, and with the Moto G Stylus 5G, we're getting a 5000 mAh battery that supports 10 watt fast charging as well. So in general here, charging speeds are basically going to be around the same, but the Moto G Stylus 5G does have a huge advantage when it comes to the battery life, because with a 5000 mAh battery versus a 4000 mAh battery, that's clearly quite a difference. So if battery life is important to you, then the Moto G Stylus 5G will definitely be a better choice. Now another thing I do want to point out here is that neither of these phones have wireless charging, and the reason I bring this up really isn't because I expect it in phones like these, but because there is another Cricket phone that's really similar to the Cricket Innovate E5G, the Cricket Dream 5G, that does actually have wireless charging. I just wanted to make that distinction because the Cricket Innovate E5G does not have wireless charging, so if you are looking for that feature, definitely don't get those two confused. So again, neither phone has wireless charging, so if that is a feature you want, then definitely keep this in mind. And speaking of other features, the Cricket Innovate E5G does actually have NFC, and the Moto G Stylus 5G doesn't, so if you like to use tap and pay, then the Cricket Innovate E5G will have an advantage. On the other hand, the Moto G Stylus 5G, obviously as the name suggests, does have a stylus, whereas the Cricket Innovate E5G doesn't, so if you do want a phone with the stylus, then the Moto G Stylus 5G will not only be a great option, but it's pretty much one of the only options in this price range. But in conclusion, which of these phones is better? In general, in almost every way where there's a significant difference, I would say the Moto G Stylus 5G is a better device. In general, in almost every area that has a significant difference, I would say the Moto G Stylus 5G is a better device. First of all, the display is not only a little bit larger, but it also looks a lot better with a 1080p resolution versus 720p, so if you're consuming a lot of content, this is definitely going to make a huge difference. In addition to this, the Moto G Stylus 5G also has a lot more storage, with at least 128GB, if not 256 if you get the unlocked version, versus only 64, which again, is not terrible, especially if you're more of a light user, but honestly in this day and age, if you have the choice, I would definitely recommend going with 128. The Moto G Stylus 5G also has a better camera that not only has a lot more features, but also just better quality in general, and this is great if you're taking a lot of pictures, and even if you're not, having the option to get better photos is always a nice thing. The Moto G Stylus 5G also has a much larger battery at 5000 mAh versus 4000, giving this phone better longevity and quite a bit more battery life. And again, this really just kind of goes without saying, but the Moto G Stylus 5G does of course have a stylus, making it really one of the only phones on the market that actually does. That being said, on the other hand, these phones again really do have pretty much the same kind of performance. Neither of them is really going to be faster than the other. And in addition to this, the Cricket Innovate E5G does have NFC, whereas the Moto G Stylus 5G doesn't. And in this day and age, with contactless mobile payment services becoming more and more popular and widely used, I feel like having NFC is a pretty big advantage. So if you do want a phone with that feature, or you just don't need the extra features the Moto G Stylus 5G has, the Cricket Innovate E5G will still be a good choice. But this concludes my comparison between the Cricket Innovate E5G and the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G 2021. Again, if you want to learn more about either of these phones individually, I will be linking to several other videos about them in the description, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. And if you want to see the latest Cricket deals, I will be including those as well. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Stylus Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.